all the nice warm-up questions I had. I'm going to skip.
Jump straight in, yeah. I prefer to jump in anyway.
But just quickly, that's the fire exit. We are going to be live streaming. I'll come to the audience for questions in a little while, but because we're live streaming, just keep that in mind. So that's extra reason to be short in your questions and also respectful. You've just moved over from science and technology to trade. In the science and technology role, you've had some interesting, tough challenges. You've made some. We've had some big changes. The Online Safety Act, for example. What do you feel you've learned from that process, moving into the new role?
Well, every day since I was appointed and got into government is the steepest of learning curves, which is amazing because that's what I've always enjoyed, and I've always thrived the most when you have those big moments of sort of learning. I would describe it as you get core skills and you get core knowledge and you get core analysis, but then you get these huge challenges that go out, and there's this sort of grey area where you become more aware of the things you need to learn as you go forward. The only time that this job can be intimidating, well, there's lots of intimidating moments for it, but it is where you're not quite sure what you need to learn and what skills you need to get. But you just have to not be too intimidated by that as you get thrown into it. And of course, the more you go through these sorts of jobs, the more you get familiar with what the process is to get what you need to have in your mind and get the people around you that can help. The great thing about moving from DSIT to DBT is that in a Venn diagram between the two departments, there's a lot in the middle. And in fact, with Liz there now, and with the way that the two departments need to work more closely together, actually, you'll find they'll be squished together a bit. I mean, just as most obvious example is that DSIT now has, thanks to this government, after the 11% uplift in R&D spending as a government, has £86 billion over the spending review period to spend on R&D. You've got all of them from UKRI through to Innovate UK through to ARIA. You have some incredible resource from traditional funding through universities through to high risk, high return possibilities funding for innovation and to get innovation created and sparked and to the first point of commercialization. And then with DBT, you have a similar amount of money being invested by the British bank, the British bank. So you have the investment banking that we have, and it should be seamless, and there should be much more joined up from real heavyweight investment into R&D, real heavyweight backing of commercialization, and then once you get the fundamentals of the economy right underneath all of that to build it upon, and you have the investment landscape far more matured and well-resourced, then you're talking about some really, really exciting things happening in investment, commercialization, upscaling, and wealth generation.
So you've been a champion for AI in your previous role, and we had the trade deals with the US last week where we saw huge amounts of money coming in on big tech deals in the UK. We've got the AI strategic growth plan, but what would you say to those that feel that there's too much of an emphasis on big tech and that this is too central to both the trade or the tech proposals?
Yeah, I would just say that government can do more than one thing at once. And I think anyone that would see what I've done with JLR in the last 24 hours, which of course isn't the last 24 hours, it's been a culmination of the work that I've been doing since the second I got into the job, will see I'm not turning my back on existing industries or manufacturing sector or any of the other sectors that are crucial to the British economy. We're really blessed in this country. We have a complicated, diverse, rich, colourful economy. I mean, many economies around the world, are much more mono-focused. We have a rich economy, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't be absolutely embracing the new and the high growth. The two are not incompatible. The fact that we have 4 of the top 10 best universities in the world, the fact that we have the language, we have a pedigree of science, and we have a very long established industrial base in this country, including automotive, means that we can then fully harness the AI revolution. So when Jensen Huang comes to Britain, which didn't happen incidentally out of the blue, I mean, there's a reason he's coming here and not other places, and the concerted efforts that we put in to establish that relationship and build that relationship. And when he comes here and says that he is going to partner with Britain to make us an AI superpower, it's because of all of the assets that we have right across our economy, including in our industrial base, that is so appealing for him, because he knows that he's got foundations to build on. So all of these things are entirely compatible. But if you look at the top, fastest growing global sectors in the world at the moment, space, automation, AI, drone technology, climate technology, health technology, bio and life science technology, these are the sorts of areas that Britain is so well placed to capitalize on. And if we can harness this wave of innovation, coupled with the disruption that's going on in the global trading environment, including tariffs, then we can be as entrepreneurial as a nation that great entrepreneurs running organizations are, and see opportunity and excitement in amidst the disruption and the challenge, seize it, commercialize it, and then we will have our first $1 trillion company at the same time as having an SME and industrial base which is flourishing.
And you mentioned JLR, and obviously it's been hacking and that has caused the problems that they currently have. We've already seen that earlier this year with M&S, with Co-op. We see it also with small businesses. There is what we call at the SMF a fraudemic. Whenever we count the crime stats, fraud is not included, and yet it's the biggest single crime in the UK. Do you think that the business community, that small businesses, large businesses are unprepared for the threat of fraud, and what's the government doing to address the sort of cyber harms that we're seeing?
I'm not going to say something that could be construed as making a statement about every business, because for every business that has succumbed to these ransomware attacks, there are literally thousands that have been resistant to it. But of course, all it takes is one success, and you see a jewel in the crown of the British economy being made vulnerable, becoming highly distressed in a matter of hours, and it having an impact right the way through the supply chain. And just to get a sense of the gravity of what's unfolding, this isn't just the JLR supply chain, which is why I acted in a way that I think most people recognize is big and big enough to meet the scale of the challenge in the moment that we're in at the moment, because there's a lot more work that might well need to happen, and a lot of preparation work that we'll need to do in case things move in different directions going forward. But many of the contractors and the supply chain companies that are in the JLR supply chain also supply to other automotive companies. But because JLR is the biggest, their economic success depends on JLR. So if that supply chain went down and fully went out inactive, then you would find supplies to Honda and Nissan and other supply chains, which are exported to Europe, stopping. So this was much more serious than I think than even people realised. So that's why when I went to JLR, I've obviously been in touch with them since the very beginning, since I was appointed, which was about a week into this nightmare. But going there, meeting suppliers, meeting workers and the unions, and then going and visiting a company so I can understand in depth the impact they're having as part of the supply chain. Then, what we saw announced last night and has been unfolding today, I think is something that I was insistent meet the scale of the challenge and buy space for JLR to start the process of recovery, whilst also not having to worry about resource when it was involving and supporting its supply chain, for which is a contractual part of the deal that I've struck.
I want to move on to trade, and when I think back to the ding dong that we had in the Commons and the Lords over Brexit, there was a thing called the Kyle Wilson Amendment, which, if you're a nerdy like me and you followed the sort of Brexit Remain battle, the Kyle Wilson Amendment, which you'll correct me if I get this right, but it was essentially calling for a confirmatory second vote. It was trying to see if there was one last way of stopping the calamity of Brexit. And so I feel you, perhaps more than anyone else in the government, know the cost of Brexit to the UK and how valuable it is to the UK to have a better, stronger relationship with the EU. So is that still something that you believe? And if so, what are you going to do about it?
Well, I certainly do believe that we can have a better and a stronger relationship and a more productive relationship and a more fruitful relationship for people working and living in both of the territories. You don't just, in this situation, for what we inherited, you don't just go from where we were to where our potential enables us to be in one jump. Yeah, all of these things, they are relationship based. And people kind of think that anyone could just jump in and do what Keir's done with the US administration, or anyone could just do what's been done in other global relations. It's not. You have to build the trusting relationships in order to even have the door open to talking about some of the things that delivered the first big step forward in healing the damage of the Brexit deal that was bequeathed to us. And that is now, I think we have to get used to as a country, that we're not going to have these sort of sort of periodic moments every decade where there'll be a new deal.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we are in constant iterative negotiations with the EU, as we are incidentally with most of our trading partners, but with the EU in particular, because we left a regulatory environment for which Britain culturally is very closely aligned. The US and other countries, they regulate in fundamentally different ways than we do. And that means that we have opportunities to trade with the EU that sometimes can go further, just simply because we regulate in similar ways and we strive for high standards in regulation. So that gives us opportunities. What I'm not doing is saying that we're going to start leaping back into institutions, but I don't think we've touched the sides yet in what we can do as two territories. And just to go back to where I started about the relationship stuff, when I was first appointed in DCIT, I mean, very, very first, in the first couple of weeks, I did virtual calls with EU commissioners and then got to the EU as quickly as I could and sat with them. And I can only describe, and I'm not being flippant or, I mean this with great respect, I can only describe the meetings I had as being almost therapy. Because,
for them or for you?
Well, it was interesting for me because I came in. I mean, I don't want to waste time by sinking into all this stuff, but I grieved for what I had lost and fought for. Because you mentioned the Carl Wilson amendment, that was defeated by 12 votes.
It was very close.
And and Theresa May 232 votes in her first attempt, and I think it was 47 votes in her third attempt. So Phil and I, and it was a tough thing because we would have accepted her deal, and there's a good chance it would have got through the country, so it was, but anyway, but the second we lost that election in 2019, that was when I grieved for what I had fought for and thought was the right choice for our country. The night we actually left, I weirdly thought I would feel something, and it didn't. By then, I'm a pragmatic politician, and on behalf of the community I represented at the time and now the country, we are where we are. I'm standing on a landscape that isn't my choosing when it comes to the economy or the public services with any of these things. So you just crack on with what's before you. But the EU had a very different perspective, because the commission that we inherited when I came in last year was the same commission that had negotiated with Truss and Boris Johnson. So every conversation started, literally all of them, with the commissioners. I studied in the UK, or my husband or wife is from the UK, my daughter or son is at a UK university, or married, and they spoke about the emotional attachment they have to the relationship, and then they say how personally hurt they are. And you think, my goodness, I'm here on behalf of a country trying to talk about all the opportunities for trade and cooperation. But it was very, very deep personal relationship stuff that we had to deal with. And of course, we went through that, and then we got a new commission, and instantly with a new commission who didn't have that relationship, that history, we were able to very quickly move on. And I'm not saying that there was a barrier before, but they felt the need to say it to somebody from Britain in authority, in government. And then, and you can see where we are, but yeah, there's a huge amount more. There's a lot, the India trade deal is great. There's a lot more for implementation and exploitation of that by business for that deal that we've already struck. So I'm going over with 100 businesses on delegation with the Prime Minister the week after next. So we're out there trying to grab all of these opportunities, and they're not as incompatible as people think. And the EU is moving forward. All the stuff I listed about high growth sectors, including AI and automation and drones and some of the biotechnology stuff, none of that was talked about in 2015, 16, 17, or when we left. This is all new. So we're not encumbered by the legacy regulation and laws and stuff with the EU. So on those areas, we are talking afresh, which give us a massive opportunity, and we're not encumbered by the things that people think we're encumbered in those conversations.
So I'm going to come to the audience for questions in a second. I'm just one question, so get your questions ready. So one last question. This conference is being framed as Labour versus Reform, and in the work that the SMF have done looking at the rise of populism, one of the key factors about populism is it's strongest in those communities where there are fewer university graduates. And we think that among those people that didn't get to go to university, there is a sense that social mobility is no longer there for them. Now, back before you were a politician, you were leading charitable organizations focused on youth employment. And one of the things that people probably don't know about you, even though you're now the Right Honourable Dr. Peter Kyle, is that you left school without qualifications. So how do you see that issue as people who are in your shoes now that you were in then as one of the things that's driving reform? And do you think we're doing enough as a country, as businesses as well, to help those people climb out of that?
I'm going to show you something on behalf of the audience. My dad was born about a mile and a half that way in 1941 in what he would call a slum. And that's his family.
Wow.
There. And he left school at 14 and to become an apprentice stonemason. And he was in the Navy at 16, door-to-door salesman at 26, I think he was, a decade later. Pilkington Glass down here. And you're all wondering why I've not got a Scouse accent. It's because he moved south to become a salesman in the south and worked his way up and ended up owning the company. So his work ethic was like nothing else. He said he got the discipline in the Navy, but then it was the ladder that business provided at that time was what enabled him to work his way out of poverty and my family to go on the journey. And you're right, I left with no usable qualifications. I had a few sort of like Zs and Us and things like that. And then applied lots of times to university. I went back to school when I was 25 years old and sat in a classroom with 16-year-olds for a year, which was potentially humiliating, but I knew why I was there and what I was doing. So I wouldn't allow it to be a humiliating experience. So my family has always been on this journey, and business has been a big part of that. Entrepreneurial drive has been a key part of that. I accept that people growing up in deprived communities today, I think it is harder to get on that ladder than it even was for my dad, who was growing up in such extreme circumstances in that era. And part of that is the macro, the post-war economy needed, the sort of the elite of the time wasn't big enough to do what needed to do. So there was a door that was wide open that my dad just leapt through. It is something that I want as quickly as I can to start understanding how, from a government perspective that is not dictating to the private sector, how we can create the circumstances where business and entrepreneurship is far more of a ladder that's available to everyone from every background than it has been to date, because we talk a lot about education and its role of education in social mobility because it is fundamental. There are other aspects of life in the British economy that could also be an incredible, a more accessible opportunity for succeeding. I am here. I was politicised in the period that you just described, trying to get into university and being rejected again and again and again. Because of my accent and because of my doctorate and because of my status now, everyone just makes assumptions that it was inevitable that I would be in this position. Nobody who would ever meet me as a kid or somebody in my early 20s, with the exception of one person, which is Anita Roddick from The Body Shop, would ever think that I could achieve these sorts of things. And I'm just very, very aware, and always has been, that very few people have someone like Anita Roddick who would see something in you that that you don't. And so we have to have, therefore, public services that do it. And for me, public services tried to just divert me cleverly off to a pathway they thought was best for me at that moment in time, looking at me then, not looking at me now. But the fact I got in and I battered the door down to get into university. I got in, just loved every single second of it. And then they asked me to stay and do a doctorate, which I thought was hysterical because they tried so hard to keep me out. And then they didn't want me to leave. So I did it, but that was the moment at which I realized that we think as people on the left, whether it's at the center left or whether it's the other bits of the left, we think that public services are just by definition there for people when they need it. And whether it's for communities which suffer disproportionately with crime, whether it is communities that suffer disproportionately from the absence of economic opportunity, whether it's social relationships and all the rest of it, for many, many communities or people, at that moment you need a public service that is assertively on your side to help you become the person that you are capable of. Too often still, it is not there for you. And that is something that is the central thing that gives me a mission in politics.
Great. Questions? We'll go 1, 2, 3.
Okay. Sophie in Politico. You were saying before that you're not turning your back on existing industries. I just wondered what you could say about the steel industry. It's been 5 months since we signed the economic prosperity deal. And should we just give up hope of any further reductions on steel tariffs? And have you locked in the 25% rate? Is there any more reductions to make?
Okay, the question is about steel. The day I give up hope on anything is the day I walk away from this job. So no, there is certainly in no aspect of my work do I think is hopeless, because I've seen Britain succeed against the odds in so many different circumstances, and having been part of the team which is unlocking some of that against the odds, I think that there's all sorts of things that are possible in all sorts of different areas, and I'm not being specific about steel, but it's in the mix. The thing that frustrates me is that people, particularly in some parts of the media, but never Politico, they sort of bank things and move on in a nanosecond. We are the only country in the world, and you'll know how many countries there are. I don't know, is it 198 or something? We're the only country in the world that doesn't pay 50% tariff on steel. So we have a 25%, not drag, but advantage on the rest of the world, because it's always competitive, it's always comparable. So British steelmakers do get to export with a huge competitive advantage into America. So as a starting point, that's a pretty damn good place to be. Now, of course, we want to deliver more for steel. I want to deliver more for steel. I want to deliver more for all the different sectors in our economy, because we are ambitious for the future and we are always moving forward in our negotiations. So I don't see that steel is it's always put to me in singular terms, but it is an integral part of how we view the economy. That is now obvious. It is an integral part of how we see our country and economy moving forward. And of course, that is part of our thinking when we are having conversations with America. But also steel came up in the conversations I had in China, because I was in China a couple of hours after I was in Washington. And these are all parts of the sort of interconnected sort of assets that we have as an economy that we are fighting for right now.
Alice Smout from Reuters. You spoke a bit about building trusting relationships. I was just wondering, what level of trust do you think business and the business community has in the government. Your predecessor, before the election, talked a lot about being the party of business. And it seems like following the last budget, some of that trust was perhaps breached. Do you think now you're in the job, it's a chance for a reset with business? Or do you think it's actually, they thought they had a trusting relationship with your predecessor, and now actually there's disruption, every minister in the department's sort of changed, they've got a new group of people that they need to sit down with and be able to talk to?
Well, firstly, let me say that, yes, the ministers have changed, but those core planks of economic and trade policy remain. The fact that I came into the job and then the next day I was in Washington negotiating, I was there to negotiate the tech partnership deal, the future tech partnership deal, which landed £300 billion of commercial opportunities between America and the UK. Added to it unexpectedly, short notice, was also trade and tariff talks, and then straight to Washington. The modern industrial strategy fully in place. The legislation on modernising the relationship between workers and businesses, which simply needs to happen because the relationship is evolving over time, but legislation hasn't kept up with it. These things, are still in action, being implemented, and there is certainty because business told us again and again and again in opposition what they wanted was certainty, and they have that consistency between ministers. Let me just be honest, and I pay absolute tribute to Johnny. I've got an amazing starting point thanks to him. But because of all the overall decisions that the government had to take in extremis, because people think when you win an election, you go back to zero and you just start from afresh again. We started where they left off, and they left us with a series of extraordinary challenges to try and tackle. And yes, we had to take tough decisions, which the public found tough, and yes, business found tough too. So it's not a question of Johnny or me. It is a question of, yes, this government does need to reassure business, not through rhetoric, but through action, that we will deliver for them. And we accept that we need to make sure that the changes that we are making to yes tax, to yes regulation policy, yes on planning, yes on our social policy too, that these are things that aren't just going to make our entire country better, but people will feel it in their pay packets. And they will feel it in their ability to do better things with their lives and their families and their communities. And that extends fully to business as well. I want businesses to see it in their bottom line and feel it, to be able to invest more in their workforce, to be invested more and more in their innovation, and in the way that they do their business life, conduct their business life overall. And I accept that we are not where we wanted to be at the speed at which we wanted to get there. But I hope that people will see for me, they will see a sense of urgency, and they will see a real clarity when it comes to announcing policies that affect business operations in this country into the near and straight through to the long term as well.
Matthew Sinclair, Computer and Communications Industry Association. The trade strategy talks about digital trade agreements. It would seem like a natural kind of next step complement to the tech partnership to add rules elements to it. I wondered what you thought the prospects were for that kind of agreement with the US and other major economies, and if there's anything you'd be looking for from industry or I guess any think tanks to make that happen.
Yes. So we focused primarily on trying to get the sort of skills relationship and some of the immediate barriers to businesses sort of partnering with either universities, research labs, and other companies between the two territories to unlock this immediate thing that's before us, which is the AI revolution, infrastructure, skills, harnessing data, and then unleashing new innovative forms of software. So those were the tenets of this. The sort of digital arrangements between the two nations they're quite intricate at the moment, and we certainly have a digital set of agreements between us which exceed those that we have with other territories. But if there's anything specific in there that you think would be beneficial economically, societally, then I'd like to see it, because we're quite open-minded about where we take these relationships, provided it is mutually beneficial and unlocks something that we can't do on our own.
We've got time for one last quick question. Yes?
Hi, Helen Garner, Good Things Foundation. 21 million adults in the UK, working age adults, lack essential digital skills. The high end is all well and good. And businesses have reduced their investment in training by a third since 2011. So how can you, because obviously you're an advocate in your old job, how can you make sure that businesses actually understand that those essential digital skills are so critical for growth in this country?
Yes, these are conversations that we've had for a while now, and even in opposition, it was great to come and visit you and see the work you're doing in the front line, which is incredible. And also in DSIT, having to really fight to find those 25 million quid to set up the digital inclusion work to sit alongside Opportunities Action Plan, and the work that you and lots of others did on that was amazing. So one of the things what I'm not going to do is just shove quite a lot of onerous obligations on business right at this moment in time. I think the is just the general economic environment, the lack of growth, the high taxation that is a consequence of the chaos of the 14 years before we came into office. That is what we're trying to tackle. So until you get businesses being able to thrive in a growing economy and see more opportunities, it's going to be very hard for them, because they will make absolute choices about where they're allocating limited resources. And this is what we're fighting against. But in terms of what government can directly do, when I was at DSIT, we moved digital skills, AI skills, out of the Department of Education and Skills England into DSIT. So DSIT, and now the brilliant Liz Kendall is rolling out a program which will train 1 million students with core AI skills and 7.5 million people in the broader economy. And that is through, for the first time, using the power of government to convene the work that the private sector is doing and bring some strategy to the work, because lots of private sector companies are doing really great bits of work. It's just not coordinated, it's not strategic, and it's not using the insight the government has in order to share it and make sure that it's value added. The reason it's important, if you think in the broader economy, people who are over 30, 35 and over are using AI double the amount of people who are 55 and over. The time it takes through training to close that gap is 2.5 hours. So with AI, it's not like teaching somebody a programming language before you can actually get going with it. It is about a foundational understanding of how AI works, how to harness it, and how to get the basics of bringing it into your life in a way that's unique to you. And once you start that process, it then starts to work with you based on your unique characteristics and your unique ability to harness it. And that is why what we have is a massive opportunity, as well as the starting point that I totally accept is a low one because of circumstances that you've outlined.
So the Peter Carl equivalent to the Norman Tebbit, go on your bike, is do your 2.5 hours of AI learning, and that's the solution.
Yeah.
I'm going to help you get back on time for the rest of your day. Thank you so much, Peter Carl. Please say thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
One last thing before